So, I live in New York and was going into the city to meet my parents after one workday. I think I was about 18 at the time, and I'm a female. I was on the subway just getting into Penn Station, and it was extremely crowded, right at rush hour. I sat in one of the seats by the end of the car, and the car filled in slowly around me. A man stood directly in front of me and held on to the bar above my head. Immediately, I felt very uncomfortable having his crotch literally in my face, but I reassured myself, thinking that it was very crowded and he probably didn't mean to do that. I decided to look at him as little as possible, so instead, I would look down at the floor and at his shoes, or to my right out a window across from me. I kept counting the stops, feeling very nervous even though I told myself there was no reason. So, as I was sedulously trying not to look at the man in front of me, I turned to my left. A man there was looking at me with a very odd expression. It, for some reason, made me wonder what was going on with the man in front of me, so I turned to look, to see out of the corner of my eye that the man had his dick fully out and erect in my face. I panicked. I had no idea what to do. I leaned away from him as much as possible and refused to look at him. I noticed that he kept leaning in with the motions of the car and leaning further into me, but I refused to look. I had no idea what to do in this situation. There was nowhere to go. The car was packed. Finally, my stop came, and I ran off as quickly as possible. I found my mom soon afterward and cried. I was so shocked. We found a police officer and told him about the incident, but he didn't seem so concerned. Now, I make sure never to sit in the edges of subway cars, and next time, I will stand up and make a scene rather than sit there. I know this story isn't that scary, but it was really disturbing for me.
Number 2.
A girl named Laura was traveling back to her apartment from work late at night in New York City. She was a little nervous about taking the subway so late at night, but she figured that there would probably not be too many people riding it, so she decided to forego a cab and take the subway anyway. When she got on the subway, she was surprised to see that there were in fact 3 people already sitting there. 2 large, suited men in dark sunglasses and a little girl in between them. Laura was surprised to see such a young girl on the subway at this time of night, but based on how she was dressed and her designer sunglasses, Laura figured that the suited men were escorts or bodyguards for the daughter of someone wealthy. Laura took her seat across from the trio. If anybody else gave her trouble, she was sure the strong men would help her out. At the next stop, a man in his late 20s or early 30s got onto the subway at the other end of the car from Laura. He was very clearly tired and quite unkempt. His shirt was wrinkled and definitely not clean, and he had what looked like a few days' worth of stubble. The man was exactly the type of individual Laura hoped to avoid on her ride home. But the bedraggled figure was certainly no match for the men who sat across from her. As the subway moved on, though, Laura noticed something very odd. The man at the other end of the car would glance up, look slowly at Laura, then at the men, then at the girl, and back to Laura. He did this several times before the next stop, at which point he got up and moved a few seats closer to Laura, the men, and the little girl. Understandably nervous at this point, Laura was still confident the suited men would fight off the creep. However, the men didn't move even as the homeless-looking man repeated the process of looking at the other passengers before moving a few seats down. After several stops, he was seated almost right next to Laura, and yet she was the only one who seemed to be bothered. The suited men and the girl stayed put. Laura's heart pounded as she counted 2 more stops until her apartment. How much closer would the suited men allow the threat to go? With dread, Laura realized the subway was slowing as it approached the next station. The instant the doors opened, the sketchy man grabbed her around the waist and carried Laura, screaming, out of the subway. The man ran with Laura over his shoulder as fast as he could, visions of being robbed, raped, or murdered flashing through her mind. Eventually, the man set her down. He was panting. He quickly gasped out, "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. My name is John. I'm a student at Columbia Medical School. I work with cadavers all day, and I guarantee that little girl was not alive."
Number 3.
I know that my story isn't nearly as scary as some of the other stories, but it is one of the scariest things that have ever happened to me, so I thought I'd share it. I'm a female, and I was 14 at the time. I'm from a big city in Germany, and that afternoon, I wanted to buy a birthday present for a friend. I planned on taking the subway downtown where all the shops were. Even though my home city is big, it is considered very safe, so I never felt unsafe going to friends' houses or downtown by myself. While I was waiting on the platform, a guy slowly walked past me and stopped just a few meters away from me. I remember that he must have been in his late teens or early 20s and that he had glasses on. While I looked around the platform, bored, since the subway wouldn't arrive for another 3 minutes, I noticed that the guy was directly looking at me. Being a rather shy girl back then, I quickly looked away. After a few seconds, I wanted to check if he was still looking, and I took a quick glance, and surely enough, the guy was still staring. This went on until the subway arrived. By then, I was feeling really uncomfortable. Luckily, there had been a few other people on the platform, so I still felt kind of safe. I got on and succeeded to snatch one of the few empty seats left since it was close to Christmas and the subway was packed with people. I couldn't see the guy from my seat and I slowly calmed down. A couple of minutes later, I got off at my stop and took the escalator up to the street. While standing on the escalator, I turned around and my heart sank. The creepy guy from the platform was standing a few meters behind me on the same escalator, and he was still staring at me. I tried to calm myself by thinking that this station was a popular meeting spot, and a lot of people who wanted to go shopping got off here, and since it was close to Christmas, he was probably just some random shopper. When I arrived on the street, I turned right, walked down the street, and turned right again at the next corner. When I turned the corner, I quickly looked down the street I was coming from, and the guy was walking in my direction. I felt really uncomfortable, so I entered a bookshop and waited behind a bookshelf for the guy to walk to wherever he was headed to. After a few minutes, I got out of the shop, and that was the moment I started to panic. The guy was standing just a few meters away from the store, waiting. I should have ran back in the store and called my parents to pick me up. Instead, stupid 14-year-old me hoped that there was a logical explanation for this guy's behavior and that he might just have been waiting for someone else. So I got out of the store and walked in the opposite direction of where the guy was. I walked faster, hoping that if he was following me, I would lose him among all the other shoppers. But when I turned right at the next corner, I was walking around the block. I looked back down the street. He was still just a few meters behind me. While I walked even faster, I felt like I was about to cry. But I knew I had to keep calm. So I turned right again, and when I looked back, I could still see him behind me. I was positive that he was indeed following me. What other reason would he have had to walk around a block without entering any of the stores? While I tried to think about a way to escape, I suddenly saw my chance. The street light on the crossing just a few meters in front of me turned red, and I started running as fast as I could. I managed to make it just barely to the other side before the lane was packed with traffic. I looked back. The guy didn't make it across the street and was standing on the other side, waiting for the light to turn green again, and he was still staring at me, but this time with a creepy, wide grin. At that moment, I felt so scared as I had never felt before in my life, and I started running again, this time into a big department store just a few meters away from me. I knew that the department store had another entrance at the back, facing another street. On that street, there usually was a line of cabs waiting to pick up shoppers. I sprinted through the store and out the other entrance. To my greatest relief, there was the usual line of cabs. I practically jumped into the first cab. In tears, I told the cab driver my home address, and then shouted "quick," while frantically looking back to the door, expecting to see the guy come out any second. Fortunately, I didn't see him. I'm still thankful that the cab driver instantly started driving and only asked what happened and if I was alright when we were a few blocks away. In tears and completely shaken, I told him about the guy that was following me and how scared I was, and when we arrived at my parents' house, he refused to charge me and waited until I was safely inside. To this day, I'm still grateful to that cab driver. I don't know if that guy who was following me was just playing a very cruel prank on me and just wanted to scare me, or if he had something way more sinister in mind.